right, good morning everyone. I've got my different hat on. Today we're digging into the future of one of the world's most versatile foods, the humble but mighty potato. From sports performance to climate-smart farming and changing consumer preferences, the potato is evolving in fascinating ways. I'm joined by three experts to help unpack this evolution. Mr. Anthony Viljoen from PepsiCo is on my left. To his left, Ms. Nikki de Villiers from the Sports Performance Hub, and Mr. Cobus Pienaar from Woolworths on the end there. Thank you very much all for taking part in this discussion. I think Mary Thompson said it very well this morning. These collaborative discussions are really the ways in which we get to the solutions and those innovative ways we're going to tackle the volatility and the complexity of the growing environment. Anthony, I'm going to start on my left here with you. How has PepsiCo invested in climate-resilient potato varieties, and how are those varieties that you've invested in addressing sustainability challenges like water use, soil degradation, etc.?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's actually quite a complex question because it's about what you can and can't do. From a potato breeding or variety perspective, we are limited in a sense where this consumer is quite sensitive around genetically modified or gene altering. We can do these types of things, breed resilience into GMOs like maize, but you can't necessarily do that in potatoes. So you're going to have to find, let's say, a suite of solutions that complements the ability to be more climate diverse. So you start with soil health, a bit of practices from a nutrient efficiency perspective. So what we do is we aim to help farmers with practices around how to optimize these types of things. And the stronger your soil is, the more resistance there will be in the plant naturally. And then we'll overlay variety suitability by specific regions. So in some regions, only specific varieties work, and in other varieties may work in all regions, but we collaborate with farmers to try and find the optimal outcome in terms of how to combat climate, specifically in things like water usage efficiency, lowering the actual use to produce your potatoes, particularly in areas where there's a known water scarcity.
Cobus, coming to you, and this is from a retail perspective, what trends are you seeing around consumer preferences for fresh versus processed potatoes, especially among health-conscious and price-sensitive shoppers?
Yeah, we've got a very interesting consumer base in South Africa. You have a group that is got only so much money, so the cheapest product will go home because that's all they've got. And then you've got your more sophisticated, your high LSM customer. And they don't only buy on price. They also want to know how well is this product grown in terms of the environment. Is it safe? Is it nutritious? And how did we manage people and how did we manage animals on the farm? So they've got a group of decision-making aspects that they use before they purchase a potato specifically. What we do see is that there's a specific price point in potatoes on the shelf. Then they obviously swing to something else. And not many potato farmers know this, but what we've seen in our stores is that if a potato, we had a couple of months ago where potatoes were extremely expensive, the swing to pasta was unbelievable. We did not anticipate it. So they subsidize the potato for something else. So one needs to be very careful on how you do your pricing also out there for the consumer. They're very sensitive in terms of that.
And of course, we have retailers, unlike, I think, and maybe you'll tell me if I'm wrong here, in South Africa, our retailers cater very much across the board to your high LSM shoppers and to your very lower end of the LSM spectrum, where they will go to the same shop, where that doesn't necessarily happen overseas, or does it?
Yeah, it is, you're absolutely right. The feed that comes into all the retail stores is from the highest LSM to the lowest. And there's not a specific buying pattern for each LSM. There's a lot of other factors in the consumer study people can tell me more about that trigger a consumer on their decision making on when to pick up a potato. I think just for us in the potato industry, we just need to understand more what is those triggers to understand what makes a customer choose between a potato or something else on the store.
Nikki, potatoes are often misunderstood nutritionally. Are they starch? Are they a vegetable? How should they be used in diets of athletes and active individuals? Because we know consumers think in ever more complex ways around what they're putting into their bodies and for what reason.
Yeah, so it is a vegetable botanically, but if we look at it in the dietary planning, we do present it on a plate as a starch because it acts pretty much the same as a grain on a plate of food. So that's, it's got pros and cons to it, right? Because if you try and reduce somebody's starch intake, then, you know, they had to choose between a grain and a potato. In active individuals, we obviously have it much, much, much better because these people need to eat more and more and more and more. So it is very nicely positioned, and I think in athletes and active people at the moment where we really try for them to increase carbohydrate intake because we know it makes a difference in performance, the people are busy trying to move away from excessive sweetness. So they're trying to move away from everything that's sugary or sugary drinks or those kind of things, and they're moving much more towards whole foods as a carbohydrate, you know, source. So I think it's got a big, big role to play, and it's just a matter of how we're going to position it in terms of, we know when people run marathons, we know there's potatoes on the course, but is this optimal? I mean, isn't there other places where we can definitely do much more with that, with potato as a product? Yes.
We keep saying with challenges there are opportunities. Clearly there are opportunities for positioning of the potato in this market as well. Anthony and Cobus, recent regulatory changes around crop protection products and new breeding techniques are causing concern in farming circles. How do these changes affect your operations and the value chain to the consumer? Let's start with you here, Anthony.
Okay, so I think it's not necessarily just down to the consumer, it's also down to the element of production on the farm. The less availability of actives, the more farmers have to adopt to the change. Fortunately, we can learn from Europe, stemming from the Green Deal. There's a lot of, and I mean, there's very many people in this room today that are actively involved in biostimulants and biochemicals. And there's a lot of things we can do proactively to start adopting towards the change that we can see coming. So if we're just proactive and we can foresee the change that's going to come, we should be able to handle the change. Now, when it comes to breeding techniques and changes thereof, complexity within potatoes is something that's probably far beyond most other commodities. And we've seen change from elements of tetraploid breeding to diploid. And now there are true potato seed functionality that's coming in, and depending on whether this is true to type or not, it maybe fits within the ambit of certification in South Africa. But there are other countries that have already started dabbling with some gene editing with things like CRISPR, and that's particularly in South America. So they're a little bit more advanced, and I think that is actually something that will be beneficial towards us and the consumer, because it's not genetically modified, it's just altered to adapt more to these requirements. So if you are going to have to apply less chemicals, you will have to have more specific traits in each variety in order to accommodate those scenarios.
These changes in regulation, Cobus, places a very heavy burden of communication on producers, on commodity organizations, on retailers, especially in a world where the focus is so much on health, on climate friendly, on organic, on raw foods. Now we look at something like genome editing, which has huge benefits for producers, for consumers in the long run, but you've got to teach consumers about those benefits and about the safety first. As retailers, what do you think your role is?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. It keeps us busy. We're dealing with an animal called social media. And in social media, everybody's entitled to their opinion, and they're right from their own perspective. So and sometimes if communication from us as retail and producers are not on time and accurate, it can do a lot of damage. So one needs to be flexible. You need to think on your feet and quickly respond to it. I think in my mind is that communication to the consumer on what it entails to grow a potato in a farm and what it needs to go through before it ends on the plate, we can do a better job than what we currently do. And in a mind of an uninformed consumer, a pesticide is a bad thing. You're not allowed to use it. They never connect that maybe with the responsible use of an active, which is ticking the boxes of the criteria of being environmentally friendly, etc., is that it enables the farmer to put a potato on their plate. So if they're totally anti-pesticide or pest control, they might end up with no potatoes on the plate. They don't know that connection. So that's why we have started with a program where we are spend a lot of money on the actual testing and what makes a farmer, what's the decision they take to spray. What is that aspect that they decide to spray? Because we're really worried that pesticides do have a role to play. And to ban everything, we're going to have a big problem in food security. So we need to balance this very carefully, and we need to communicate to the consumers very clearly on what it entails. Otherwise, we might run into some problems.
And then there's the additional burden of communication around nutritional information. And that's more towards, obviously, the product food safety side of things, but with so many more producers also wanting to add value to the product that they produce, this is a space that more and more farmers themselves are playing in. To that point, Nikki, can you break down how potatoes compare to other carbohydrate sources like rice and pasta, especially in terms of glycemic load and recovery for athletes?
All right, so yeah, the positioning is very good in terms of, I think the consumer would probably see the carbohydrate, right? Carbs is bad and starch is bad and those kind of things, but they don't often see what's coming into the product with all the others. I think the other bad propaganda around potato was usually that pasta, some types of pasta and rice sometimes have a lower glycemic index. So the glycemic index was a big thing. Often that made them choose not the potato, depending on why you choose the food. So I think that's, if you compare it in terms of the carbohydrate content, they pretty much align quite well. If you look at the amount of processing that goes into it, obviously the potato will reach much, much higher in terms of minimal protein. There's a big thing at the moment in terms of processed food. That we want to decrease the intake thereof, but we don't understand what it is, that kind of thing, especially amongst consumers. The benefit obviously is in the small detail, right? The benefit is in the potassium, the benefit is in the vitamin C. So that really makes a big difference if we're going to sell or compare food to each other. In terms of glycemic load, it obviously does vary about the portion size of these things. So us as dietitians has got a big responsibility to teach portion sizes, because I think we can eat anything if we just know how much of it or when to stop eating it, I guess. So the glycemic load will depend on what the consumer believes in terms of what the portion size is. Glycemic index, it is higher, but I mean, there's certain things that we can do to overcome it. In sport-specific scenarios, we want the higher glycemic index stuff. So that's actually quite a good thing, but it's difficult to get a high glycemic index potato on a route, right? So those messages must just be packaged very, very good in terms of selling product, yes.
Kobus, you mentioned earlier that example of some of your Woolworths consumers shifting to pasta when the prices increase sharply. How does Woolworths manage affordability and ensure long-term value from potatoes, this class of product, when storage and yield challenges are factored in?
Yes, I was waiting when the price thing comes up, because we're not known for being cheap. So, it's your affordability is an aspect. It depends from what angle you look at it. For us, it is about being in business in the next 100 years, and our farmers and our factories be in business for the next 100 years. So I can put a potato for R2 a kilo on the shelf tomorrow, but then we and the farmer and the factory won't exist. So, and it can come back again to what goes into a product and what level of effort goes into a product that you get there. Yes, you can't put it for R100 a kilo on the shelf because then nobody will buy it. So it's that balance and the demand and supply factor that is a big factor in South Africa for us. To make sure that we add value to products, or let's say that the customer gets value for their price, you need to hear their voice. And it's a very interesting world when you dive into consumer behavior and what they want out of a product. And it changes rapidly from one month to the next. So you don't get a pattern. So for us at Woolworths, the studies that we've done with our consumers is that they buy a product, any product at Woolworths, based on 5 aspects. Is it safe? Safety is the big one. Is it nutritious? I mean, there's a number of publications on the nutrition of food that went down over the last 80 years. Then, do I get value for my money? And then what about the factory and the farm workers? And what about the environment? So they base their decision on that. And they add, those aspects is value to them. So your efforts in being more environmentally friendly, they understand that there's a cost to it. It doesn't come cheap. So, yeah, it's a difficult one. I wish I could answer you what is the plan, but we learn as we go, to be honest, because the world is changing quickly. And just if you look at the climate in the last 5 years in South Africa, specifically to potato growing areas, it was a big challenge to understand what is the value of a potato at the end, and what is the price you should put it on the shelf. So it's not an easy answer, but hopefully we'll get over time, we'll get the formula to calculate it accurately.
We've got a lot of farmers in the room. Anthony, are we producing too much in pursuit of yield, compromising quality and shelf life? What role does precision farming play in reducing input waste, especially fertilizer? Because we know that's about 35% or upwards of a farmer's cost.
Yeah, that's a bit of a double barrel there, but the short answer to the first part of are we producing too much in the pursuit of yield, in South African context, it's no. There's no subsidy. The farmers are reliant on top line to make sure that their balance sheet works. The other part is, does it actually influence quality? Yes or no? Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, we saw data on wastage, etc. And wastage stems from whether the consumer is going to buy it or not, and what that perspective is that is associated with certain elements of quality. Each variety has got a probable break point of where yield starts turning negative into bad quality. But I think that the approach is correct. It's more about optimizing, and it comes to that optimization on farm. That are we over-fertigating? Most likely. I think we've got access to a lot of technology that can help us today with precision mapping. Instead of going into complete grid sampling of soil, we can actually start looking at soil productivity probability based on historical data as well as current real-time data. And we have the ability to variably apply. When we start variably applying, we can actually start reducing the amount of input, and then that aim towards more output becomes less significant in the conversation.
Coming back to you, Kobus, how can the potato industry borrow strategies from the fruit sector, such as cultivar investment and soil input monitoring, to improve quality and reduced farm-level wastage? And that's sort of tying into the question from Anthony.
Yeah, if you asked me the question 20 years ago, I would say the potato industry were far behind. But over the last 20 years, the potato farmers has caught up quickly. And exactly what Anthony says is that you cannot afford to grow a potato on a soil that can't give you the yield, or a variety that can't give you the yield, or to a market that don't accept the type of potato you produce. And that's the learnings from the apple industry, specifically in the early 80s, when they ran out of market because they've decided what they will grow in Elgin, and the consumer must eat it. The consumer had different ideas. So, and I must say the potato farmers that we deal with is using high-tech, mapping their soils, making sure their scouting is done properly to preempt. Don't wait for a disaster to happen. There's a bit of money saving in that as well, that you reduce your inputs. Make sure that you monitor your plant health right through the season. There's a number of systems that's available that's very good to make sure you do not run into a deficiency in terms of fertilizer when it's too late. That's got a big impact, sometimes not that much on yield, but on quality. So there's a number of things that the potato farmers is doing really well lately. And traveling quite a lot in the world, I think we are right up there with the best in the world in terms of efficiencies on the farm. Just because of your high inputs, you cannot afford to slip up, otherwise you're not going to make any profit.
We regularly get told in the agricultural space, farmers can only control what they can control, and sometimes they simply cannot control consumers. The incidence of diabetes is skyrocketing worldwide. There's been a lot of media focus on it. So, Nikki, potatoes are often one of the first things that are excluded from a diet, which is bad for the people in this room. What nutritional or product innovations could reposition the potato as a smart carb choice across different health markets?
Yeah, I think obviously consumer education is huge in this. That even the product as it is, without doing anything to it, is acceptable and it can be used. I think that is important. The innovation would be more towards getting the end product in a way in which they can use it easily, right? So if we're going to change on a potato to make something with it, to make it better for a diabetic to use, people are very much convenience orientated, so they don't want to really do a lot of effort in their own kitchens. So if we can market products that already has got a lower glycemic index, so prepare the stuff beforehand, cool it down, and then get it in a ready-to-use format, that will lower the glycemic index, and we can market it that way. Also, in terms of marketing in a way that the portion size is determined. I mean, people are buying stuff in a packet because the packet has got a label, and the label says you're getting this much in. With a potato, they don't know, all right? So that if we can put it in a packet that it's a one serving and I can buy it, and that, I think somebody did speak about the ready-to-make meals. If you pack it in that is also quite good. In a sporting field, I think there's a lot of innovation can be done there. We can put it in a gel format. It's part of some of there is supplement products out there that already do use potato starch with the idea that it does release maybe a little bit slower it does release slower of the carbohydrate for more endurance or ultra-endurance people, which makes quite a bit of sense, and those messages can easily be applied in their everyday life as well. So I think it's just a matter of trying to get over the wrong messages that all carbs are bad, but also getting over the message that if something's got a high glycemic index, we're not allowed to use it. If you position it in as part of a meal with an added protein or added little bit of good fat, it can be used quite easily. But as I said, the consumer doesn't want to do that job at home. They want to do it in here's your little meal, have it. Yeah.
Just a bit of anecdotal thinking from my side. My hubby is type 2 diabetic. So when he has to choose between having a nice big draft beer and cancelling out potatoes and bread, he'll go for the beer every time. So maybe you should start making beer from potatoes. I don't know. It's a win-win. Anthony and Nikki, this question is for the both of you together. So there's been a rise in fortified and minimally processed products like, for instance, air-fried chips. Are we close to developing a super potato that's convenient, nutritious, and accepted by modern consumers? Let's start with you from your perspective, Anthony.
Okay, obviously Nikki's going to have much more of an insight whether it's acceptable by consumers or not. But what I can say from our perspective is Relatability from a consumer standpoint is also driven by necessity, and that necessity is, can they afford it from a value proposition perspective, or do they want to eat healthier? Now, developing a potato that fits the need isn't necessarily something I think we're close to. It's more around what you put with the potato. So is it fried, or is it baked, or is there reduced sodium on the product itself? Do we have less monosaturated fats in the oil that we process it in? All of these things will obviously have a specific price point, and that price point there speaks to the relevance of the LSM and how it's distributed within Quibus and others, Quibus stores and others. So from our perspective, it's, the potato is in our minds there for snacking occasions, and we need to position it in a way where it works for each occasion and has the right value proposition.
Nikki, you were nodding there.
Yeah, I do agree. One must be careful of trying to meet the needs of all of the consumers, especially because taste plays a very, very big role. And as soon as we alter to taste, we sometimes alter to not to their benefit. All right, so if we want potato chips that's fried in oil, it's a problem. Now we made air fried, okay, so they're good. There's still what you put on it. Do they eat it with mayonnaise, the salt that goes on it? So one must be very, very careful changing the original product that's really good into something so that they can quickly eat it. I think there's a market. There's a market for a little bit of a potato bite, maybe, instead of, fried potatoes. I think there is markets for it. But I just think that one should rather market it in the sense of, this is the raw product, and this is how we use it. From a little cube that a baby can eat till a grandfather's mashed potatoes, in terms of the application and how we use it and what we can do with it. I think there's historically been a lot of recipes out there, and if you see a potato recipes, it's cheese and cream and sour cream, and that is problematic. I think that is where most of the problem came in. And if we're going to alter the potato to make it consumer friendly, we're going to alter the cost. And it's often the stuff that gives taste to food is usually the stuff that's not brilliant for health. And that, doing those alterations, I think, can be problematic, unless you're going to position it as health enhancing, right? If we, from what you've said, there's a part of the consumer that wants healthy food or nutritious food. So if we can add an inulin or a prebiotic to a potato flour that, they present it, or if we can add everybody nowadays is protein all over the show. If you can add a protein to make a product, a higher protein potato product, I think those would be innovations that can work. Will it work forever? Depends on, we must be very careful what we change for fads. And we must be very sure it's sustainable for what we're trying to do. Yeah.
In this very diverse mix of the South African consumer, we are a country that is labeled as having maize as our primary staple food for lower income groups. We are very heavily reliant on protein. Protein is probably the thing most families think of first when they start planning a meal. Are we going to have lamb chops? Are we going to have a beef steak? And then based on that, what are we going to have with it? How can we reframe, from an agricultural perspective, our thinking around the potato to ensure that the potato plays a more central role in South Africa's food security, particularly as we see wheat imports rising and price pressures mount on consumers? I'm going to start with you, Quibus, and I'd like each of you to see if you can add to that. How do we centrally position potatoes in food security?
Yeah, potato is a very unique, like Nikki said, vegetable, is that you can, from one bag, do a lot, and it can cater for the lowest income that boil it on a fire to a very highly processed product where you add a lot of stuff into it. So I come back again to my point of communication. I don't think consumers really understand the potato, what it can do. Sometimes you've got the one group that only see bad in a potato. You've got consumers that purchase from us that never, ever purchase a potato. For what reason it might be, I don't know, but we do have them. So I think that if we can explain what the potato means for you in a diet, and like you said, where do you start from planning your diet? Is it the right thing to start from a protein perspective? I don't know. The dietitians will be more au fait to answer that. But I
Sorry,
think,
and if there's farmers here who produce potatoes and livestock,
Yeah.
they'll be conflicted.
yeah, I understand that. So communication and teaching the consumer what a potato is all about and what you can do with it. I think that will be a great start.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's better if you look at the, positioning in it. I think we're a little bit guilty with the starch story. So I heard the vegetable part. So we need to try and position it properly back to a vegetable part, because I think there's a lot of people that cut it because the starch part. But I mean, we can't just change messages all the time. I think that's the one thing. Education is definitely necessary in terms of what it can mean, and education in terms of the nutritional value of stuff, I think is so important. So what do you get extra when you buy a potato? And in terms of, the other nutrients in there and the nutrient profile. A little bit of how to position it in terms of, we are going more plant-based, that it's not that we don't want meat, but predominantly plants. And I think from that perspective, you can position it quite well as a start to start thinking of it would be any dietitian's dream if people start thinking about the vegetables before they do anything else. So just positioning it in that way, but I think a lot has got to do with how good it is, right? Not necessarily in terms of, so what do you get extra? And that the bad name was always with the preparation. The bad name was always of what do we do with it, as from raw product to plate. So there's a lot of education necessary there in terms of the consumer education.
Yeah.
Anthony, anything to add there?
Yeah, I agree with the education part, but I'm more around not necessarily only the nutrition part, which is important, but I think from a food security perspective, we need to educate consumers on the actual efficiency of the potato itself. So potatoes are, in terms of carbohydrates per hectare and starch per hectare, all of these things far superior to most other commodities that we have. In South Africa, we've got the unique ability to produce it all year long. So the consumers are quite spoiled, actually, because they've got fresh potato supply all the time. I think the big fundamental differences between potatoes and maize at this point in time is maize is storable for a very long period of time. So we can trade it on a futures market, and we've got different elements of pricing, different mechanisms. But with potatoes, the value that you actually get from the potato itself is far superior when it comes to water usage. It comes to the actual value proposition in a bag. But I think we also owe it to ourselves to rethink how we position that to the consumer in terms of longevity. If we give the potato a little bit more longevity, be it variety or practice of washed versus unwashed, and how we proposition that, there will be an exponential demand increase where the preference might shift from maize to potatoes to a certain extent.
From your experience, do you find consumers even know the basics about potatoes? In terms of the majority of people, when they walk into a shop, do they go up to a shelf of potatoes and go, "Oh, hang on, I know what these are. I'm not going to buy those because I want to do something different with the potato, or I want it to last longer, so I'll buy this one over that one"? Or do people just go, potato in a bag, go home?
Not in South Africa. I mean, in Europe, there's a very specific education around varieties and specific properties. So there'll be potatoes that are fit for mash, potatoes that are fit for jacket potatoes, for crisps, for French fries. In South Africa, going back to the earlier comment around top line makes the world work, varieties and the success of varieties are dictated by how much yield we can get, because the farmers are under financial pressure. And that goes back to consumer. It's very difficult for us to drive education when top line is what's actually the requirement within the ambit of how we produce potatoes.
I want to come back to messaging to consumers just a little bit and ask what kinds of messaging, and this is to you, Cobus, and Nikki, and even to you, Anthony, if you've got something to add, have been successful in the past with changing the perception around foods that are fattening. And we've seen this huge, carbs are bad, cut all carbs, banting, and then swing back the other way, and vegetables are great. But, because of this, are potatoes a vegetable or a starch positioning of the commodity, that might not be entirely apparent to consumers. So how do we make it clear what could work with consumers in the South African context?
Yeah, it's a science on its own. To understand, I wish I can read what's going on in the brain of a consumer, then I can answer you more directly. But I think that one should start structuring the way you communicate. We've got too many loose messages going out, maybe from a potato industry into the consumer base. So if we can, maybe via an organization like Potato South Africa, and everybody, all the stakeholders, play a role into that we portray one message. The moment you confuse a consumer, that's when you have those swings from no starch to only banting, etc., because of the confusion we create. So maybe it might be a good thing if we can just get into a room and see what is it from the potato industry, the message that we as a unit wants to put out there for the consumer. That's what I will do as a first step.
On that point of unity of messaging, I'd like to open the floor. We have about 5 minutes left of this conversation. If anyone in the audience has a question for our panelists, please don't ask me anything, I know nothing. But if you have a question for any of our panelists, please raise your hand. One of our technical team will bring you a mic so that your question can be heard by everyone in the room. And then we'll attempt to provide you with some answers. Do we have any takers? We have a question over there. Dieter, do we have a microphone? Oh, what mic over here? Okay. Haha.
Yeah, here we are. Perhaps more comment. We were privileged to go to the Potato World Congress last year in Australia, and we went through their business there on potatoes. And they've probably done away with cultivars and just focus on what is the purpose of the potato. So there isn't a, let's call it the Cifra of a Panamera of Avalanche or whatever, but the purpose of what you're using it for. So there's 5 of them, and that's that. So perhaps we should have a look at that. And Willie and Dirk, they were there. So perhaps for the future, we should start working with that.
Targeted messaging, absolutely. Any more questions from our audience? You have a gadget on your table which will activate a microphone. Right. No, there we have a taker, Willie.
If this microphone works, it's working. I think coming back to Peter's point as well, the remark was made at what, let's call it the diversification of advertising on specific cultivars or varieties. At what point in time does it really make sense to start doing varietal diversification? Is it a financial decision? Is it a market share decision? Is it positioning? What would be the trigger to start looking at diversification of, let's call it, the portfolio?
Anthony, you want to
Just for
take
clarity,
this?
Willie, is that in the eyes of the farmer or the buyer?
Well, we keep on being told in South Africa that the farmers actually dictate the product that's on the shelf, not really the buyer. And the way that the consumer is looking at the product is mostly driven by the way that we present it from the farmer's side. But in the meantime, we've got so much diversity that we can work with alternative cultivars. But there is no way to physically promote a cultivar until it gets to a point of critical mass.
Yeah.
So where do you, is it a push-pull effect? Where do you create the balance, and at what point is it worthwhile to actually start chasing after the specific characteristics of a cultivar?
Yeah, from my experience, consumers have a big say in what they want. So, obviously, when it comes to a table potato, the skin finish is a really important element because that's how we've positioned it historically. But so there's some in the Sunfeld, skin finish is always better until new varieties came in. So that decision, as a farmer and as a buyer that you make, is dictated by consumer relevance, but it also speaks to as a farmer, your farming business, and then what works for you. If you've got a lot of scale and you want to plant just for the market one specific variety, and it's worked historically, that's your financial decision to make. But what I've seen a lot is many farmers diversify across not just varieties, but also industries. So to the fresh produce market, a little bit of informal, some of it processing, because of the variability of the price on the market every year. Using that as a barometer dictates the financial feasibility of the decision that you make. I think, though, that we could be better at variety development over time by getting more technology involved. So having geofence references with climate indices and soil types, instead of going to, and I mean, I'm speaking for ourselves as well, instead of going and selecting varieties based on competing properties, we should rather go select based on the region where it's grown and the indices that are specific to that region.
Yeah, thank you. I think the wine guys would enjoy that because it talks back to the terroir, isn't it?
Right, I think we have run out of time, and I could hear some stomachs grumbling here from the front rows of the audience. So I'm going to thank our panelists for their thoughtful insights into the evolving role of the potato. From genetics to gym bags, it's clear the potato is not just surviving in the modern food system, but it's adapting in exciting ways